In the IELTS exam, you are specifically asked to make comparisons where relevant in IELTS Writing Task 1 Academic. So in this video, I'm going to give you a practice drill for comparisons to help you with your IELTS preparation. When I say drill, I don't mean an electric drill, like a dentist's drill. I mean a routine that you practice again and again in order to make it automatic. Like a fire drill when everyone practices leaving the building quickly. In this case, the drill involves 3 comparative structures that you can use in the IELTS test to improve your grammatical range and accuracy. And I'll also give you a few more IELTS writing tips and tricks as we walk through the drill. And to finish with, I'll tell you the most effective way that I know to do the drill on your own. Here's the first part of the drill. We're starting with the absolute basics. A cup of coffee costs £3, whereas a glass of wine costs £5.80. So coffee is much cheaper than wine. We're using much instead of a lot because a lot would be informal. We'll use alternatives to much in parts 2 and 3, but for now we'll use much. And remember as well, it's cheaper, not more cheaper, because we've got the ER. It's either ER or more, so more expensive, but not both more and ER. I suggest that you now pause the video and repeat this sentence aloud. Then get yourself a pen and a piece of paper and see if you can write this grammatically positive comparison as a grammatically negative comparison and as an advanced numerical comparison before you restart the video. Here's the negative version. So coffee is not as expensive as wine. And here's the advanced version. So wine is around twice as expensive as coffee. With the negative comparative, so not as ... as, remember that the adjective doesn't change, so expensive doesn't become more expensive. If the adjective was cheap, cheap wouldn't become cheaper. And remember as well that with a negative comparison, it's difficult to talk about how big or small the difference is when you're writing formal English. So here we don't have an equivalent of much, which tells us that there's a big difference. With the advanced comparative, it's £5.80, not £6, so the difference is not exact. Therefore, we've used around here. In parts 2 and 3, we'll use alternatives. And then it's not 2 times, it's twice. And with twice, we have to use the as structure. Note also that we used whereas to express contrast earlier in the sentence, and whereas is an extremely effective word to use in this context. Here's the second part of the drill. If we compare coffee with wine, we see that the former is not as expensive as the latter, the cost of a cup of coffee is £3, whereas the cost of a glass of wine is £5.80. Now pause the video again and repeat these two sentences aloud to help you remember them. Then that was a drill in the background. Here's the second part of the drill. If we compare coffee with wine, we see that the former is not as expensive as the latter. The cost of a cup of coffee is £3, whereas the cost of a glass of wine is £5.80. Now pause the video again and repeat these two sentences aloud to help you remember them. Then get your pen and paper again and see if you can make the negative comparison into a grammatically positive one, this time using the word significantly instead of much, and also into a grammatically advanced one, this time using the word roughly instead of around, before you restart the video. Here's the positive version. If we compare coffee with wine, we see that the former, coffee, the first of the two, is significantly instead of much, cheaper than the latter, the second of the two, wine. Or we could do it the other way around and say the latter is significantly more expensive than the former. And here's the advanced version. If we compare coffee with wine, we see that the latter, so wine, and here we're doing it the other way round, is roughly instead of around twice as expensive as the former, coffee, the first of the two. Note that using the former and the latter, or the latter and the former, enables us to avoid repeating coffee and wine. Note also that the use of a conditional with if in the first sentence and the use of whereas in the second sentence gives us two-part sentences, so two complex sentences, which is what you need to do and what the examiner is looking for if you're aiming for a score of 7 or higher. And see how in the first of the two sentences we've made a more general point, and then in the second sentence we've supported it with specific data, which is exactly what you have to do in IELTS Writing Task 1 Academic in the IELTS exam. Here is the third part of the drill. If coffee is compared with wine, it can be seen that the latter is approximately twice as expensive as the former. The price of a cup of coffee is £3, whereas the price of a glass of wine is £5.80. We're using approximately as an alternative to roughly or around, and in the positive comparison we'll use considerably as an alternative to significantly or much. You know what to do. pause the video and repeat these two sentences so that you start to sound like a Cambridge academic. Then before you restart the video, get your pen and paper and see if you can write the positive and negative versions of this advanced comparison. Here is the positive version. If coffee is compared with wine, it can be seen that the latter is considerably more expensive than the former. And here is the negative version. If coffee is compared with wine, it can be seen that the latter is not as cheap as the former. Note that in this version we've used the passive voice, is compared, and it can be seen that. Again, we have two-part sentences, so two complex sentences with if and with whereas. And again, in the first sentence we make a more general point, and then in the second sentence we support it with specific data. Exactly what you have to do in IELTS Writing Task 1 Academic in the IELTS test. That's the drill, and I recommend that you do it regularly for a while to make the structures automatic, because in the IELTS exam you have very little time. The most effective way to do it, in my experience, is to write the three versions of each part of the drill on a piece of paper by hand. Not on your smartphone, on a piece of paper by hand. Because when you form the individual letters physically by hand, your brain remembers much more effectively than if you just go tap, 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 tap. Then carry the piece of paper around with you, and at least once a day when you go into a shop or a restaurant or a cafe, choose two things to compare and see if you can say all 9 options correctly. If you can't remember one, or you want to check that you've remembered something correctly, just look at your piece of paper. And if you make a mistake, when you get home, write the correct version 3 times by hand. This is old school, but it's very simple, and in my experience it works. So hopefully it will help you with your IELTS preparation. Different people work in different ways though, so if you come up with an alternative method, please share it in the comments so that other people can try it as well.